skip over the details, and let's talk briefly about how a few conjectures about how these mechanisms play a role in the uprisings and the developments we've seen after these. The first is during the revolution. Yeah, I worked a bit more about what actually went on particularly in the Egyptian revolution. We have mechanisms such as preference falsification. Timur Kuran has worked on this. The question is basically, why do we always notice revolutions only after the fact? Yeah? And the answer is preference falsifications. It usually doesn't pay for people to exhibit their true opinions unless they feel the opposition is strong enough to actually move something. So again, in this I would see some threshold mechanism, plus of course some contingent factors. Yeah, we'll note that a few crucial events, such as the self-immolation of the boy in Tunisia and the killing of Khaled Said in Egypt, sort of triggered such events and were probably the major turning points in mobilization. Second point, mobilization is again a mechanism, in my view, both virtual via social media and physical on the street, both with positive feedback mechanisms involved. One of the things I've been thinking about, or started thinking about, was when do we see violence versus non-violence in demonstrations, in revolutions? So I thought about de-escalation. Again, I think we see a negative feedback mechanism here at work. So, just a few suggestions for research. So we had conjectures earlier. These are just suggestions. Almost no answers. But sort of invitations where to look. Yeah? Again, you're probably familiar with some of the ideas or statements made here. When we talk about tendencies within religions, both Islam, Christianity, maybe others, hostile to practices of liberal democracy, we should look at mechanisms of both psychology and sociology of religion. We should also look into mechanisms of social conformity and peer pressure. Yeah, so why are some groups so successful in gaining and keeping adherents? We should also, assuming that there's something in the statement that our culture is actually rooted in hierarchical and patriarchal family relations, which in turn gives rise to a few, well, maybe less than desirable effects, such as fatalism, submissiveness to authority, we should look into mechanisms of socialization again and cultural transmission, something I've worked a bit on, and also on mechanisms of individual and family psychology. Again, in order to identify what exactly is going on here, why, if true, such cultural elements can be as persistent as they apparently are, but also, of course, again, remember the Kant quote earlier, whether there's anything that could be done about it. Yeah, again, we have, earlier this morning, we had talked about tribal affiliations are supposedly resilient to formation of political parties. Yeah, well, the problems are often identified. Again, we should look into cognitive mechanisms of commitment and loyalty, and particularly into the rather paradoxical effect that some religious parties seem to manage better to transcend tribal and family ties than some of the liberal opponents. Yeah, so in that sense, some of the religious parties seem to be even more modern than actually their opponents. So, we could also talk about middle class in our society, again assuming that this is actually some robust empirical finding. If they're so highly dependent upon the state for employment, and this makes them unlikely to risk open conflict with the state, we again should look into the interdependence of economic structure and liberal democracy. Again, one of the points that's usually been diagnosed in the context of the Arab Spring is an unusual strong role of military and security apparatus. Again, looking at cognitive mechanisms behind perceptions of threats should help here. Again, into mechanisms of socialization. Yeah, we often have like military families over many generations. with, of course, an associated mindset, and again, looking into socialization mechanisms might help us understand this. And of course, self-reinforcing mechanisms of retention and political expansion of political power of such military and security organizations. Okay, so let's jump straight to the take-home message, which is, I would argue that proper explanation of democratic transition requires what I've presented here, that is, mechanismic accounts of the actual causal interactions and interdependence of factors. Yeah? So we should look both at the general and the persistent conditions in social, cultural, religious, and economic dimensions, but also into the contingent, both time, place, and actor-specific details. Changes in public perception of political issues, extent of mass mobilization, election results, or decisions by the crucial actors. Yeah? This together would give us, I know it's a challenge. I know it's sounds much more complex and much more difficult than many studies that have been carried out so far. Again, I'd argue that there's nothing wrong with studying correlations, as long as we keep in mind that there's more behind that. And if we can find a way to identify what's behind a correlation, if we can actually identify the mechanism behind it, we have a much, much deeper understanding and also much greatly expanded dimensions of possible action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bertolt. I think we have a really fine inner coherence in this panel. So we'll carry on from mechanisms of transition to theoretical paradigms around transition. So please, say it.
Thank you, Peter. Well, first, as usual, I don't enter my words and promises to myself. I always say I would never speak after lunch, and here I am, I'm speaking after lunch. But I'll help you sleep, because nothing important will be said. But it's great, again, to have all of you here, and thank you for your coming, for your participation in this conference. It's also hard to talk after a philosopher, but I'll try to do something. Well, in fact, we share some of basic ideas about the analysis of the transition in their world. And also some points in my presentation will be actually in opposition to your stance of how we should go around understanding the revolutions, focusing on mechanisms and in a way, I'm distracted. Okay. Focus on the mechanism is important as far as the processes, but I'm trying to look at the different theoretical paradigms that have dealt so far with revolutions, with transitions, with democratizations. So we have different set of terminologies here, and we have to clarify it before we start talking about my presentations. But before starting my presentation, I would start with calling for a causality revolution in political science. Now, I will end up with what you just said. Correlation. We always focus on correlation or isolated case studies. They're very important, no doubt about it. But I think they help very little in developing a model or a grand theory to understand political change. When we're talking about transitions, basically we're talking about political change. But focusing on bits and pieces here and there and possible correlation and statistical regressions analysis and statistic even, and other kind of modalities of analysis, despite they're very important, I'm talking as a methodologist now, I think our biggest challenge is causality. Of course, we know that it's not easy to build a causality model in political science and social sciences. However, I think because we just surrendered ourselves to these difficulties, we did not try enough to build a causal model. So if something, I would like to take this opportunity to draw your attention and to call for causality revolution, and that might be another paradigm or paradigm shift in political science methodology and philosophy. Now, transition and theorizing transitions. Again, here also some confusion needs to be clarified. First, we mix transition with transition to democracy, as if it is mechanical, direct relation, linear. So if you transit to democracy. This is definitely a wrong assumption. It's not true. And second, we confuse causes for transition for other causes for democratic transition. And in that, we fail to distinguish between transition to democracy and consolidation of democracy. Within all of that, we tend to confuse transition, liberalization, democratization, democracy, revolutions, and democratizations. I think, that creates a lot of tension in our understanding to what is happening. So as I always say to my students, concepts are the building block of our science, of our business. So if we're not really clear about them, that will cause a problem of understanding and explanation. And I know we've been trying for the last few decades, at least in this field, to develop modalities of understanding what is happening as being the first function of our science. And we dare to deal with explanation. Of course, we scared to death of talking about prediction. And when the revolutions or uprisings taking place in their countries, so we hurry and say, okay, Middle East scholars failed to predict the revolutions. Well, we have not been doing any prediction. So we did not fail to predict. We did not try to predict to start with. And I think these needs to be corrected if we to understand fully, or quasi-fully, if you wish, what is happening in the Arab countries and in the transition. Again, now, talking also about transition or theorizing transition is basically an invitation to theory of abnormality. I'm not sure how we theorize abnormality. Right. So a lot of tasks is here, a lot of important steps to be taken. When I'm talking about abnormality, undetermined consequences, sequences, and outcomes, how you theorize these things. And again, this is also needs to be taken in consideration. Anyway, I might keep talking about at least how I frame my analysis for too long without delving into the substance of what I want to say. So how about I just state directly what I think the theoretical construct needs to be employed in understanding transition. As, of course, we all agree that we have to distinguish between transition from some regimes to some regime else, regardless of the type. So what causes lead to transition? And this is definitely identical with revolution, because changing could be either by revolution or by other means, but there is a transition here. And then the second focus should be about what causes are conducive to building a democratic system. And of course, raising a very important normative question, does it have to be democratic regime? Does it have? Why? Why transition should go directly to democracy or to democratic model? I think here's a very important normative question, and we might debate the authenticity and legitimacy of this question, but theoretically, I think it's a very important, challenging question. And you can see a lot of biases in, just to start with raising this question. Okay, so my model is saying that four important propositions. First, the literature on Middle East politics at large, on Middle East democracy and democratization is in the state of underdevelopment. This is a fact. And needs to be taken seriously. And we do lack methodological rigor. And this is another fact that needs to be dealt with. Second, theories or the theoretical paradigms are dealing with either the transition, which is shifting from regime to regime, transition to democracy, consolidation and survival or death of new regimes. That's the categories of the literature on democracy and democratization at large. Now, the basic focus was on the macro level analysis. Here we're talking about structural, essentialist, culturalist approach. That there was determinant variables within the macro structures, whether social, cultural, or economic, that will inform the transition. Now, what was ignored, obviously, from this analysis is the micro-level analysis. Now, in the historical development of the literature and theoretical paradigms on transitions and democratization, went also through three different stages. You can mark it by 1870 till World War II, when the focus was about by democracy and democratization as a concept and the processes produced by mostly Europeans. Now, World War II and forward, the issue became American political scientists focusing on issues related to measuring democracy and the processes of democratization. Till maybe the 80s, when the Woodrow Wilson project started on Latin American democracy and transitions, led by O'Donnell, as we all know, and the portfolio contributions to advance our understanding of how democratization and transition did take place in this region. And here we start to find some language of modeling of agencies, of micro-level analysis, without providing the needed mathematical model to understand and to build a causal relation between those variables leading to democracy. And therefore, my proposition here is to provide a framework for a theoretical construct that basically link this structural macro-level analysis with the micro-level analysis. The first be identified by socio-cultural indicators, and the second by individual agencies. And when I'm talking about agency, I'm talking also about collective actions, I'm talking about groups, I'm not only talking about people, individualism. And the notion, the bridge that link both together is the notion of dignity. That is a way to understand what is happening in their countries. Now, why dignity? Here I'm talking about a major collective psychological transformation processes took place in their worlds for the last few decades. These transformations, these collective psychological transformations were caused directly by Arab regimes' policies and their outcomes. So basically what I'm saying here is the Arab political systems, without exceptions, with their policies, particularly their economic policies, focusing on neoliberal policies, it created processes of marginalization and exclusion, and contributed to the transformational processes within the collective psychology by excluding people out of the political sphere. And this is to some major theorists, that was called actually the death of politics in their world. In fact, yes, that was the death of politics for a few decades in their countries. Now, these policies, combined with the nature of the political regimes themselves, when I'm talking about the nature of political regimes, I'm talking here about the characteristics that we gave to those regimes, and we call them sultanistic regimes. And I'm talking about sultanistic regimes, actually, it is very telling. Here we're talking about not only family, it's a personal political system. based on unholy trinity, if you wish. The dictator himself, with very few members of his family, allied themselves with corrupt businesses and security agencies, and they own the state with all its resources, and they decided on the policies to the society at large. So the nature of these regimes, so that being socialistic regimes, with the kind of policies they adhere to, combined of course with very important changes on social media and others, contributed to this psychological transformation where people came to realize how compromised their dignities are, and it's about time for them to go to the streets and call for a change. So my point here is, how can we, in the theoretical level, measure or theorize for how policies cause psychological transformation? How this psychological transformation is translated into individual and collective actions, and how agency can be a key variable for its explanation. I think if we can do that, then maybe a lot of insights on causality might be gained. Of course, this needs to be modeled different ways. One of the ways could be by applying, the traditional game theoretic construct models, or rationalist model, or modified rationalist model, or can be combined with consociationalism or modified consociationalism to see where we'll arrive at. So that's basically what I'm trying to say here in criticizing the literature on I need 7 moments, if you don't mind. But let me just very quickly go over what I've written. And I have, before I just keep going on, I'm presenting this paper on my own behalf and on behalf of my dear colleague, Dr. Mohammed Khair, who is the chair of Political Science Department. So any criticism should go for both of us. Any criticism should be given only to me. Is that okay, Dr. Mohammed? Fair enough, thank you. So in here, actually, I was just providing a comprehensive, if I may call it, literature review, trying to classify the different paradigms of theories dealt with transition. And here I went to the macro level analysis, for going back to major work of Lipset, Dahl, Huntington, Gabriel Allman, Sidney Verba, Colomer, and you name the rest, you know them very well. And also we talked about the empirical evidence provided for these models. And here again, I just consulted Jackman, Bolin, and the rest of empiricalists on this field. I gave special attention to Huntington's theory of revolution and transition. And then about democratic consolidation, basically you have to consult without hesitations, Diamond, Wanlens, and Stupin, and what they have to say. And then of course Monk. Survival democracy also, you cannot ignore the basic work in that, which is Adam Berezovsky from Chicago University of Chicago, I guess, and a host of other theories. And then I go directly to the democratization in their role, and also I classify the literature on that, who written what. And in particular here I focus on the specialists in international political economy, and they focus on rentier state and other aspects of political economy and its impact on the democratization process in their world. And of course the essentialists, especially Lewis and Faduri and Huntington, and the relationship between Islamic tribalism and the incompatibility paradox between those and democracy and democratization. And of course I go also to the consociational theory, and then I provide a count of gaming and democratic transitions and what has been done in this field. Of course, there's no time to go all of that, And then I go to classify the theories of revolutions. And in that also we have, three categories. Natural histories of revolution, theories of political violence, and then structural theories of revolution. And then the most important one is classical revolutionary theories, elaborated mostly by Huntington. And then I say the failure of the existing literature to provide the requested and the needed theoretical construct to explain what is happening in the Arab countries. And therefore what I'm seeing here is that what had happened so far in the Arab countries helped us correcting many of the misconceptualization of politics in the region. Mainly the major issue about essentialism, that Arabs, just being Arabs and adhering to Islam, they cannot be democratic. They cannot. And it is just, they're not going to the streets and revolutions, changes, even is not there. And therefore, as you know, the focus of our business was only on authoritarian resilience and persistence, instead of how and what are variables conducive for democratic shift and change. So since 2000 till 2010, the widespread convention was that Arabs cannot do it, and let's focus on the authoritarian persistence rather than on democratization and democratic shift in the Arab countries. So I think what happened has corrected for that. And second, the issue of how to distinguish between transition from a regime to another regime. Now, what I see, of course, as well, there is a hurry, there is a rush that, okay, listen, all what happened actually, about what theories been produced in this part of the world about conspiracies and how the West and the Zionists played our regimes on people in order to cause all these changes, in order to serve the greater interest of the Americans and Israelis. Also what you've seen here, actually now Islamists are taking over, and then the Arab world is actually worse off, not better off. There is a sense of rush and hurry here. In Argentina, it took him 11 years to draft their constitution. So I'm saying, and this is a big sin, theorists can, and philosophers will overdo when they try to build a final theoretic constructs based on a very short period of time. Revolutions or changes in their countries transition from the existing former regimes still in the process. So it is too early to conclude about whether the outcomes of these transitions are democracies or autocracies or other regimes. I'm seeing only processes are taking place. And again, the period that these, or the time that these revolution or transitions took so far are not sufficient to generalize any kind of valid conclusion. I will give you even my 2 minutes here, so I'll say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sayyid, for a very interesting tour de force through theoretical paradigms concerning transition ending in the Middle East. And I guess that this is where Dr. Hassan Farani will take his point of departure. So please, Hassan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. And I will start by saying that I skipped lunch. So according to Dr. Zaid's theory, I should be better off position. But this remains to be seen, actually, because I'm very hungry. So any gap here would be excused. This should be made perfectly clear from the get-go. And in my presentation today, I will take the easier job. Unlike my colleagues who went too much into philosophy, I think, after lunch. And we were not really ready for this kind of thing to absorb. But I will make it really easier for the audience here, because I'm going to talk about the things that takes place in this part of the world right now. when I say that the democracy deficit in this part of the world, I'm only stating the obvious. It is obvious wherever you go. You can't really talk about proper democracy. And I love the way that the typology of my colleagues that they came up with to make difference or distinction between transition and transition to what? This is the question, because what we see in Egypt right now is not a transition into democracy as much as it's a kind of a struggle between two autocracies, the military on the one hand and the Muslim Brotherhood. And we now see Egypt is fortunately degenerating into a kind of, I wouldn't say civil war, but maybe on the brink of it. And also what happened in Syria. From the very beginning, I was a very big fan of the Syrian revolution until I saw all these radical and Nusra Front and those kind of, I would say, affiliated groups that affiliated Al-Qaeda is taken over. So the whole game is different now in Syria, though I want to see the back of Bashar. I mean, this is not a concession to Madeleine. I mean, so I hope that I'm clear on this. The Middle East is the last holdout against the global democratic trend, and this is true. And here, it is probably the easiest thing to